In our room here. And I think we start seated today. So a nice, comfy, supportive seat. Something that huh, is restorative for sure. Let's think about that. And then from that restorative space, yeah, from the restorative space, let's make our adjustments. So we'll relax first. Maybe even we feel that relaxation of the torso musculature and the spine starts to compress a little. And then start to just mobilize the musculature just enough. Start to mobilize the musculature just enough so that you feel those little subtle shifts of stability. And from that integration of stability, the expansion of the spinal column, and from the expansion of the spinal column, the expansion of the torso. And we'll give ourselves 60 more seconds here. Just continually tweaking and adjusting and expanding. And eventually, allow the eyes to blink open if they are closed. And let's take our hands, palms up, resting somewhere in front of us. And we're going to take the fingers to the shoulders or the palms to the shoulders, depending on your shoulder capacity. And if shoulders isn't accessible, just come down the arm or to wherever you can rest. You can go out laterally. So we're going to take that positioning of palms facing towards the ground now, hands resting somewhere upon us. And with an inhale, let's lift our elbows. So inhale, elbows come up. And then exhale, instead of allowing the elbows to come down, just allow the musculature to relax. And then inhale, elbows come up. Exhale, musculature relaxes. Inhale, elbows up. Exhale, relax. And inhale, elbows up. Exhale, relax. Tuck the chin to the sternum. And as the chin tucks here, think about expanding the back strap musculature. So that whole scapula girdle out wide. And take your breath right into maybe like 3 inches from the base of the throat. So a little higher than the middle of the sternum. And just feel the depth of the breath in the top portion of the cavity of the lungs, really expanding into those unused capillaries here. And then relax. Let the palms just fall down face up and let your eyes close. Let the chin lift just slightly. If you need to make those adjustments that we made when we initially set our seated position in the spinal column, make them. But really look to find the ease in the physicality. And then let's take a full, as slow as possible inhale breath in through the nose. Eventually, the lungs will have all they can hold and will exhale out just as slowly. And then eventually, the lungs are going to be empty. Take a couple of rounds of normal breath. And as you're taking these rounds of normal breath, feel kind of the freshness within the air circulating within the body, the ease of travel in and out. And then we're going to take our next inhale as slowly and as deeply as we can just through the nose. And eventually, there's going to come a point where the lungs are at their maximum capacity. You cannot possibly fill them more and will reverse and slowly exhale out, just as slowly on the exhale side. And then once again, we're going to take a couple of rounds of breath. So the rounds of breath are so that you have more of this capacity for the slowness of these big, powerful inhales and exhales. If we back them up, stack them next to one another, we may not be fully utilizing oxygen and we can get that shortness of breath sensation. So I really want you to feel the depth of these inhales and exhales. Next inhale, we'll do the same slow, full inhale. Chin is still facing slightly up or elevated just slightly. Eyes are still closed if that's comfortable for you. And then eventually we're going to allow for that reverse to the exhale side. And we'll take a couple of rounds of breath. And we're just going to do this 2 more times at our own pace. So when you feel like you're ready to fully inflate, maximize that lung capacity, and then fully deflate, empty the lungs to their fullest extent, feel free to go through that cycle. And then when you're finished with that cycle, I'm saying this, but you're not rushing. You allow your breath to normalize, and then eventually we'll take that final full deep inhale and exhale. I'm giving you the preview. You're not rushing to make that happen. Whenever you are done with that second full deep exhale, a long time from now, the chin's just going to tuck to the sternum, and we're just going to rest at ease with a little pressure at the base of the throat. And eventually, no rush. Eventually, we'll lift our chin back to neutral. And let's just turn our gaze over towards the left. And as you're turning here, I want you to think about the integration of the cervical spine and the torso. So the neck torso union, and see what you can do to soften and alleviate that base of the neck space, both structurally and supportive. So the scaffolding itself and the musculature. And then we'll relax back to neutral and just feel the asymmetry around the headspace. See if you can find your way back to a relatively eased equilibrium across the base of the throat, and then over towards the right. Thinking about that ease at the base of the throat, base of the neck. And then eventually relaxing back to neutral. Let's transition to hands and knees tabletop. And maybe a little extra focus on delicateness as you set up here. Lay the fingers out as wide as you can, and then make sure you take that lumbar arch out. And then turn your chin so that it's roughly in line with the left shoulder, and sink back towards child's pose. Now, with this big cervical rotation, you have to keep in mind that the spine is rotating as you're sinking back, and that has the capacity to anger musculature. So really listen to the high back musculature as your depth guide, and that union musculature between the torso and throat, again, is pulled into a tautness that we don't often find. So just be aware of that throat space. And we'll come back to neutral. And roll the energy in your shoulders, or roll the musculature of the shoulders here, looking for a resettling of that shoulder girdle. And then we'll find our way back to neutral. Turn our gaze over towards the right. Keep that lumbar neutral. And we'll guide our way back into child's pose. Again, really thinking about that thoracic and cervical musculature and how it's responding to being under tension as we put it under load, right? We are putting strain on the back musculature. We're just not doing it in a really weight-bearing way. We're doing it in a lengthening way. And then when you feel balanced, we'll come back to neutral. Exhale out. Keep the head neutral. So gaze is straight down. Middle of the back's going to round up into your cat shape. So not tucking the chin. And then reverse. Let the tailbone lift. Let the chin lift now and drop the belly. And reverse. Gaze is neutral. Middle of the back is arching.
and reverse. Belly drops, tailbone lifts, chin also lifts. Come back to neutral and slide back into child's pose. And settle here. The anterior compression is getting kind of juiced up by the posterior space. And so really try to allow the weight of the torso to settle. If the hip compression or the hip capsule, that anterior hip crease, is speaking at you in a way that's uncomfortable, you can shift the weight slightly forward. Or if you have the room, you can shift the weight even further back, pressing into the hands and getting extra elongation while still allowing the body to sink. And we're going to give ourselves 25 more seconds here. When you're ready, let's pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. And then take your knees out maybe like an extra inch or so on each side. So we end up with the knees maybe at shoulder width or outer shoulder width, and then drop your head completely. So the top of the head is pointing essentially straight down, and you can gaze kind of back through your legs. And then exhale out and push the middle of the back up. And inhale back to neutral. So the head comes to neutral, tailbone comes to neutral. Exhale out, middle of the back lifts. And head tucks with an extra level of tuck so that you can look back through your legs. And inhale to neutral. Find that balance. And then one last time, head tucks, extra tuck, exhale out. Find that biggest, fullest arch in the middle of the back. Yeah, so nice. Nice, Kaylee. And let's come down to, or back to hands and knees, and then sink back into child's pose. More traditional relaxation here, and this is going to be a transition. So not a lot of time, just feeling this little reset. Trying to feel the middle of the back relax into the shape of child's pose. And we'll inhale forward to hands and knees tabletop and extend our legs out in front of us. And before we get any further, let's take both our blanket and our pillow bolster. So blanket, towel, pillow bolster, make our tallest possible leg support. So however we want to do that, just as tall as we can for leg support. And then we are going to get as close as you can. We're just trying to get some height underneath the legs. So legs are going to sweep over our prop, and then we are going to head onto our backs. And settle here. We've done a lot of movement for a recharge class. Although we haven't, and we won't, stand. Let the work you've already done be received by the body. There's this lioness, and kind of in her pride's hierarchy, she is kind of in the middle of the pack. She doesn't really feel like she stands out. And she doesn't really feel like any of her assets, her speed, her strength, her skills could ever progress to a point where she could be head lioness. And she spends a lot of time thinking about that. And it makes her miserable. And the rest of her pack realizes it, and the rest of the animals on the savannah recognize it as well. We'll give ourselves about 50 more seconds here. Good amount of time to appreciate and neutralize the spine. She, looks out at the other animals on the savannah, and she sees the cheetahs, and she wishes she had their speed. And she sees the water buffalo, and she wishes she had their power. And she sees the ants, and she wishes she had such a strong teamwork within her community. And it makes her even more miserable. All right, when you are ready, let's retract our feet so that we can keep them on top of our prop. So we pull the feet back towards us so that the feet are elevated and the knees are responding to that position of elevation. And then let the arms open up towards cactus. And so this is a different mechanism of movement than we normally do. So just kind of listen to the body as we start to sway the knees side to side. Pay attention to how the hips are forced to work differently. So in many ways, this is bringing the the hips into almost their fullest state of flexion, right? Like the more we elevate the knee towards its fullest height possibility, the more the hips are in flexion. But eventually the hips will kind of just start to move and adapt and respond. the adaptability of the human body. Let's go one more time in each direction. Just exploring that movement potential. And eventually we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And I'm going to scoot my prop a little bit closer. Bottoms of the feet are going to come together, knees are going to fall out wide. So we have this elevated butterfly. Hands can stay at cactus, slide behind the head, whatever feels appropriate. The elevation here softens the burden on the sacrum, but can really extend the burden on the external rotation of the hips because it allows for more external rotation. And then you have that lateral edge support if you're feeling like this is too much, you could adjust, take the blanket off if you're still using that, wrap it around so that you get a little bit more of that supporting mechanism, and you're limited to how far you could go open. So if it feels like it's too much to go into this extra state of external rotation, wrap the blanket towel over the ankles and then tuck underneath that lateral edge for additional support. So in one way, we're cheating the shape by tilting the pelvis. In another way, we're extending the shape by tilting the pelvis. Right? We can get into more external rotation because we don't have the pelvic requirement that we would. So higher up the chain towards the belt line, we're cheating the shape. Lower down towards the hip capsule, we're benefiting the shape. And let's give ourselves about 30 more seconds here. And we'll bring our knees back towards neutral. Extend both legs down over the prop once again. And try to get the posterior chain on the torso to relax. So that external rotation, because it was so wide, it puts some tension that you may or may not have noticed on that upper posterior chain. We want that to relax. And then once you get that to relax, left leg's going to stay where it is. Right knee is going to pull in towards the torso space. Seek that anterior compression on the front of the right hip or on the right hip. And then remember, we want the shoulders to be at ease and relaxed here. And release the right leg so that it mirrors the left. Try to feel the front of the hips relax and balance. And then we'll head over to that second side. Left knee comes in, hands clasp, shoulders relax, interior hip compression on the left side, really into that hip crease. And eventually you'll be balanced and we'll release our left leg to mirror the right. Let's take both hands out towards cactus, arms out towards cactus, then tilt the cactus up. So elbows stay on the ground, fingertips face towards the ceiling. And then we're going to exhale towards internal rotation. So palms down. This can be a lot for the shoulders. If this is enough, stay right here. And if the hands aren't making it down to the ground, you can come up onto fingertips, or you could put blankets underneath each side if you have two. If you don't have two, you can do a kind of a similar shape to what we did on the legs and just go blanket over the top and have a little elevation to give you some support. If you feel like you can go further, we can tuck the hands, palms down underneath the back side of the body. And we're just going to breathe across that high sternum space. So trying to expand the collarbone with your breath. And although the shoulder structure is fully internally rotating, work to externally rotate the head of the humerus so that there's a counter force. And it is a counter force that we likely wouldn't need if we didn't spend so much time in internal rotation already. So keyboard shape, texting shape, all internal placements of the humeral head. So we are going internal rotation and then external energy, like you're trying to pull the shoulders out as wide as you can, countering that internal force that we've already created. And we'll give ourselves 30 more seconds here. And we'll release our arms back to cactus. Let the shoulders just kind of melt into their space here. And then slide. We're going back to the shape where we kind of started class. So Hands are coming on the shoulders. Elbows are pointing at the ceiling. So palms are facing towards the shoulders. You can kind of grip onto the shoulders, and elbows are pointed straight up. And we're going to do the same breath / expansion that we started class with. So it is a inhale, and the elbows start to lift towards behind you. And then exhale, and we just relax. And then inhale, and elbows go towards the space behind you. And exhale, we relax. And inhale, and we expand. And exhale, and relax. And then reset. Elbows back to pointing at the ceiling. And this time, instead of just inhale and relax, we're going to bring more consciousness into the inhale. So we are going to that full, slow, fully expanded lungs. And then the relaxation, again, we're not moving the arms, we're just softening the musculature. But the breath on the inhale side is full and deep, and it is enough to fully inflate the lungs. So when you're ready, we will inhale fully, slowly, and deeply as the elbows start to seek the space behind us. When you can no longer take in any breath, we'll relax and exhale out and try to empty the lungs completely. And when you can no longer empty the lungs, we'll inhale and start to send those elbows towards the space behind us. And when you can no longer fill the lungs, we'll exhale until the lungs are completely empty. And then you'll complete your last cycle, that full inhale, full elbow point. And the complete relaxation, this time letting your hands come down by your sides. And noting how that posterior musculature just responds and receives and eases into this space. So one day, this massive elder elephant comes and it asks this lioness, why are you so bad? You're here on the savannah. What's wrong? And she says, honestly, I'm jealous of the cheetahs. I'm jealous of the water buffalo. I'm jealous of the ants. And the elephant says, well, why don't you come spend the day with me? And we'll observe the savannah, and we'll see what the savannah is really like. And so the two do. They head out and they wind their way up this hill, and there's this Lion King-esque cliff that overlooks the entirety of the savannah. And they start to watch these animals. And the lioness and the elephant watch this cheetah chase after these pronghorn antelope. The cheetah has an unsuccessful chase. And after the chase, she kind of collapses in the shade with this massive amount of heat and physical exhaustion. When you're ready, let's slide that prop out from underneath us, one direction or the other, whatever is most ideal for you. You feel free to keep it around if you want to bring it back in Shavasana. But let's have a little space and ability to move with a neutral body here. We'll inhale our knees to a bent position, and we'll bring back in our dynamic sway. First time we have rotated the lower half of the body without the elevation. Note how your musculature is responding, and maybe even compare it to how it responds normally at this point in class. And keep in mind, we did the majority of our class with an elevated leg shape. And so coming out of that elevation, we could still have some pretty good stickiness, some residual stuck spots. Work through that into that as we move. And then when you're ready, it's not the next time, maybe it's the next time, maybe it's 10 times from now, but when you're ready, let's let the knees fall over to the left. And we'll just settle there. Finding that fluidity in our breath. That richness, that fullness in our breath. And we'll give ourselves 60 more seconds here on this first side. And so next, this lioness and this elder elephant go, and they observe the water buffalo. These huge, hulking herbivores. It's kind of getting into the depth of the dry season, and so the watering spaces are growing small. And they see this little herd of water buffalo approaching this watering hole. Being leery of the lurking crocodiles. The crocodiles are not the problem.
Problem the hippos. These big hulking beasts. And they're easily able to push the water buffalo away from this watering hole, chasing them away without even breaking a sweat. And so the lioness and this elephant watch the water buffalo thirstily walk away from one watering hole. When you're ready, let's bring our knees back to neutral. Pause here for a moment of reflection. Ask yourself if a bridge would be beneficial. If it is, offer that. And if not, if you're ready to balance out, let's let the knees fall over to that second side. And we settle here. And eventually the lioness and this elephant turn their attention to this massive anthill. And they see all these ants cooperating and building this anthill and gathering food and pulling food down into their hole. And the elephant swings its trunk, and with one just nonchalant swipe, it knocks down 2/3 of the anthill. And then they watch as these ants start picking up these stones that must weigh 10 times the weight of an ant, and they place a stone back in the pile. And then they go and get another, and they place a stone in the pile, and stone after stone after stone, right? These little pebbles, but they must weigh 5, 6, 10 times more than each ant weighs. And each ant is just spending now the entirety of its day picking up these little pebbles and placing them on the anthill, rebuilding the work of one casual swipe of an elephant's trunk. Last 15 seconds here. And eventually, when it feels right for you, as it feels right for you, knees come back to neutral. We'll pause here, ask ourselves if a bridge would be appropriate. And then grounding and landing and asking ourselves, if there's anything we might want, need, or desire for Shavasana.
And if there is, we'll offer that to ourselves now.
And if we have everything we could possibly want, we'll drift our way into stillness. And so at the end of the day, this old wise elephant asked the lioness what she observed. And she says, well, I saw that every animal has a different life, and every life has a different challenge. And the elephant says, yeah. Does the cheetah have the strength of the water buffalo? And the lioness is like, no. And she says, well, does the water buffalo have the community and the teamwork of the ants? The lioness says, no. So the ants have the size of the water buffalo. And the lioness is like, no, of course not. If they did, they'd rule everything. And the elephant says, but they all have what they need. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. Into our wrists and our ankles. Into our elbows and our knees. Shoulders and hips. Neck and head. Jaw, eyes, tongue. And eventually we'll bring movement through the entirety of the body and utilize that movement to transition from the shapes we are in, returning ourselves into a seat. In a seated space, receive that breath deeply in the lungs. Find a neutral spinal column and let your eyes close. And she looks at the lioness and she says, and you too have everything you need. Food, shelter, community. And we'll inhale our hands together at heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can we be grateful that we have every ingredient needed for happiness? And make that so. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, everybody. Love the heck out of you. Short week, but no adjustments to our schedule. So I'll be back tomorrow night for a little movement and next Sunday for a little recharge. Love the heck out of you. Have a beautiful Thanksgiving if I don't see you tomorrow. And I'll see you soon. Mwah!